Hello, David R. Becker here. I'm here today to talk to you about Holbein's gouache. Holbein's watercolor gouache, not their acrylic gouache, basically watercolor gouache. And a lot of people always ask, it's like, what is gouache and how you pronounce it? Well, it's gouache and it is opaque watercolor. It's watercolor in the opaque form. There's transparent watercolor that Holbein also sells that are some awesome paints. And they're both watercolor. One is transparent and one is opaque. And so basically, back in time when they used to make gouache, it was not very popular because it looked like pastel-y colors. It looked kind of like the tempera paints that your kids use in kindergarten, right? It has that really look of really light pastel colors. And so it became not so popular. I know when I was back in my days of illustrating, they used to use it in advertising. They used to use gouache, and all the ads were all very pastel-like. And so, and as for the artists, they didn't really like all that pastel look. For illustrators, it was okay, but for a lot of the artists, they didn't like to use it. But nowadays, Holbein doesn't use whitening agents. And this color right here, these two colors, this one's transparent, this one is opaque, and this is the gouache. This is the transparent watercolor. Opaque watercolor, transparent watercolor. You can tell right there the difference just by looking at these two little swatches I made. This is a swatch and done with the same amount of pigment with water in my brush. I tried to go as close as possible I could. This had, but because this is transparent, it shows the white through the paper. Even though it's the exact same color, when I looked at it in my brush, it's the exact same color. And I can almost, I'm not going to show you, but it's, believe me, it's the same color. But because the white's showing through, when it dries a little bit lighter because the white's showing through the paper because it's transparent. This one is opaque, and it does not let any of the white of the paper shine through it. All right, so that's basically the difference. And then you can use the transparent watercolor, like watercolor, of course, transparent watercolor, but you cannot use it like gouache. But the gouache you can use like the watercolor, because you can make it transparent by how you apply it to the paper. You can either apply it thick or wet into wet where it becomes transparent. Let me just show you that really quickly and what I'm talking about. So I can take a wet wash of the same color. I'll put some water down here, and I'll take, this is gouache. I'm going to use some gouache. This is a palette that I use for my gouache because it covers with a silicone substance. Oh, I'm putting it right on top of that. So here it's watered down, and look at this, how thick. And right now I'm almost using it too thick. So I use a little bit more wet, and so it covers even when you're using it almost like this. When you're using it really wet, see how it almost covers up the white because it's ground finer. Holbein grinds it up finer, doesn't use any whitening agents in it, so it makes it really that you can get these really bright colors. So see how I can make it look transparent? Now you can do that with the gouache, but you cannot make this with the transparent watercolor because then you're making it too thick. And you don't want to make the transparent watercolor thick. That's the use of the gouache. That's why there is a opaque watercolor. It's an opaque watercolor. And you don't have to call it mixed media when you do a painting with gouache. It is watercolor. Unless you're making it look like an oil, then it's going to be kind of hard to tell people, like, yeah, it's a watercolor, but it's gouache. So, but I don't think it's a mixed media. I've gotten that question so many times lately about if I'm using gouache in my watercolor, do I have to call it then a mixed media? No, it is watercolor. It's just opaque watercolor. So it comes in a bunch of sets. They have tons of sets. These are three I just wanted to show you. They have the bigger tubes, and this is the primary colors, and with black and white. And this is a good starter set for people if they want to just try it, because with the gouache you can use it like watercolor and make it transparent, or you can make it opaque like this. So and you have the blue, yellow, or red, which you can make a lot of different colors from. I taught a class online for this, and boy, you wouldn't believe how many colors we made out of this little set here. So that's a great starter set to get, is the 5 gouache, and these are the bigger 15mm tubes. And then we come to the smaller tubes, like on the 12, and look at the brightness of these colors. These colors are super bright, and there will be matte when you make them thick. They will be matte. They will not be shiny like acrylic. They will be matte. They'll dry matte. But that's where now you can use the varnish. You can use the acrylic varnish right over your watercolor gouache and make it back to shiny if you'd like. And that's what I'm doing to my watercolors now, because I want to use glass on top of them. And so you can make it look like a oil painting with the oil paint, like an oil frame and stuff. And so Look at those bright colors, super, super. And these are 5mm tubes. And again, if they do have a pastel color in there, which on this one they have this little green here, this permanent green light. No, that's not that one. But like if you have like a lavender in watercolor, it has white in there to make it that pastel kind of color. So they do use whitening agents when they have to make the color a pastel color. But when they have all these other colors, they do not have white in them, but they're still opaque. And they still will cover up just as good as that. So let me just show you that really quickly, that you can cover up a color like this. So I'll use a ultramarine blue. So this is ultramarine blue in gouache, and I'm just going to put it right over this. And my brush is wet, and I'm using this almost right out of the tube. Now I'll rinse my brush, and you can see how you can't see through that, right? And with the watercolor blue, the ultramarine blue deep, I'm going to put that on there, and you will see. I don't want to use it as thick as this because again, you cannot use it as thick. But look, you can see right through it. You can see a little bit of the edge of the orange, right? Now I'll put it right over here. You can see it more because this is more vibrant, and so I can just go over that and look at how it just gets. You can see right through it, and because it's transparent versus opaque. And that's what opaque watercolor is. It is gouache. And so just always remember, it's not a different kind of paint. It's just the paint is opaque, ground finer, and that way you can use it thicker. They put something also in there that can make it thicker. Now this palette I have here, this palette is a palette that you can get, I think, at some of the art stores. It doesn't have a name to it. I don't know what the name is. But it has a silicone seal, and it has these 4 or 5 little things, and I put them in there because I just spray my palette and put this on there, and it lasts. That makes the painting or the paint last so long, and it stays super, super fresh. Their watercolors you don't have to do that to because their watercolors rejuvenate instantly because they don't use Axgal. Holbein doesn't. But with their gouache, if you leave it open out, it will dry harder. But as soon as you add a little bit of water, it will rejuvenate really, really easily. So I put that on there, and then I just put it down, and it becomes airtight. So that's what I use for my gouache palette, and this is my watercolor palette for Holbein watercolors because I don't have to cover it up. It stays super fresh because they don't use Axgal in their paints. All right, and so let me just show you a couple of my paintings to show you the difference between a watercolor done like a watercolor and one done like with gouache. So this painting right here is when I did plein air, and I did this with gouache. And I know it looks like a watercolor in the background because I used it like a watercolor. I used it wet in the wet. I let the pigment float, and I got the white of the paper because this is white paper, a white board, a panel. And so I just put that in. But then you'll see a little bit later, when you look closer, you'll see a lot of swipes like with a brush stroke. And that way you have it look a little bit like an opaque painting with like acrylic or with and that way I also don't have to use the masking fluid. I don't use masking fluid like a watercolor would to keep the white of the paper. I just use white gouache and put it right on top, and that's what you can see. Let me just widen this out a little bit. I don't want to go over my face, but I may have to. And so you can see it's a little bit more where I have a little bit of thickness to that paint. And that was done on white paper. Now this one was done on black paper. This one was a black Stonehenge Aqua Black. They make a paper, a watercolor paper. And you can also do the gouache on canvas, on panels, on, you can do it on all kinds of things because you need it a little bit thicker. Where you can't do it on watercolor, certain things you can't do watercolor on because it just floats there. But it works well on Yupo, slick paper. It just works really well because you can use it thick and thin. And so that's a really nice thing about it. This was done on black paper. My last one I'm going to show you here is done on black paper also, but there's a little bit more watercolor effects in this one than there was. And also I used a lot of white on this, but I used watercolor white. And so people ask me, do I use watercolor white or do you use gouache white? Either one is fine. They're both the same because they're opaque white. So get yourself a set of one of these beautiful Holbein gouache sets and try it out as a watercolor or try it out as like an oil or an acrylic and see how you can feel and how it best works for you. They're great paints, no whitening agents. They're ones you want to get. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.